eyes may be able to see, but without you cannot feel.
What's up, everybody? This is Josio Samuels, and you are tuning in to episode 103 of the It Will Come show. And today we are going to be talking about how dysfunctional families create great entrepreneurs. So this might be a little bit of a deep and heavy one, but the reason for this is because it's a topic that exists but isn't often talked about. So let's dive straight into it. Let's get this up. Beautiful. So, first of all, happy Monday to all of you that are tuning in. If you are here and it's your first time, depending on where you're tuning in from, we do have a YouTube channel that you can subscribe to. Just literally look up It Will Come Show in quotation marks, and you'll be able to find the channel directly. But today, we are going to be addressing a very interesting topic. As mentioned, it's not something that is often talked about openly, but it's something I've definitely observed for a lot of my own entrepreneur friends who are out in the world and doing great things. When you actually dig deep and have time to speak to these same entrepreneurs, you find out just how much adversity a lot of them have gone through in their upbringing, right? From their family, childhoods. So we're going to discuss it. So this particular episode was actually inspired by an article starting from the left. All right, so this article here is called "The Dark Side of Entrepreneurship," and I stumbled upon it and was reading and realized that I could personally relate to a lot of the things that are included there. And so the dark side of entrepreneurship looks at, things from the high failure rates of entrepreneurship to loneliness. To families being broken because of entrepreneurship, even to marriages splitting as a result of too much focus on the entrepreneurial side. And then I did some digging deeper and found that there were quite a few articles written about this. Not too many, but enough. And so you can see here why dysfunctional families create great entrepreneurs, which I've named this episode after. And then also on the right there, you've got Inc.com, dysfunctional family, you'd make a great entrepreneur, And even just reading that, it's like, wow, is that a prerequisite for entrepreneurship? It makes you wonder. So what we'll cover today is, what, first of all, a dysfunctional family is, the 5 types of dysfunctional families, famous families with dysfunctionality in them, the 5 child roles within dysfunctional families, and I'm going to relate this back to entrepreneurs and teams even within organizations and businesses. How dysfunctionality molds entrepreneurs, famous entrepreneurs from dysfunctional upbringings, and then tying it all together, bringing it all together. So first up, what are dysfunctional families? So typically they are families whose interrelationships serve to detract from rather than promote the emotional and physical health and well-being of its members. So they are often used casually in popular culture. Healthcare professionals define dysfunctional family as one where the relationships among members are not conducive to emotional and physical health. Sexual physical abuse, alcohol and drug addictions, delinquency and behavior problems, eating disorders, and extreme aggression are conditions that are commonly associated with dysfunctional family relationships. Now, there was this interesting quote from a guy called Steve Blank, who's, I believe, written quite a bit on dysfunctional families, and especially in their relation to CEOs and entrepreneurs. So he found that up to 1/2 of people working doggedly to build their companies self-identified as coming from household environments marked with conflict, fighting, harsh discipline, little to no expression of love, and substance abuse. The types of dysfunctional families. So based on the research that I did, there are 5 types of dysfunctional families. They include substance abuse families, the conflict-driven family, the violent family, the authoritarian family, and then the emotional detached family. And it's quite interesting because I was actually watching a movie over the weekend with my partner, and it was called Always Be My Maybe. I think it's a rom-com, and it was quite interesting because even in that storyline, the main protagonist, a comedian named Ali Wong, her family home, she was always at home alone because her parents were busy building their business, I believe. And so she would often come home to no family, and be eating on her own, and then ended up spending more time with the family next door, and had a best friend there. So even here, a lot of our own popular films and TV series have a lot of these sort of dysfunctional families echoed, right, as just a reality. Some famous dysfunctional families, right? The Simpsons, one of the most famous. And down below, you've got Modern Family. So if you haven't watched any of these shows, these are modeled off of real life. Some people argue that they perpetuate stereotypes, etc. But a lot of entertainment is influenced by what goes on in real life. And I think one of the reasons why they are so popular is because we can relate to characters within these families as well, as dysfunctional as they are. And in many ways, there's probably very few families that aren't dysfunctional in some way, shape, or form, but it's always sort of that desire to overcome that dysfunctionality and find ways in which you can have a more functional family, right? And I think it's that aspiration that keeps us going. Because, at the end of the day, no family is perfect. But of course, you are going to have some families which may be more damaging than others, or maybe more severe. This here is a classic example of a dysfunctional family from, I believe, the 80s and 90s. It's from a show called Married with Children. And you can even see here some of these stereotypes, people wouldn't have a bar of it in today's society, right? So look at how they describe Peggy Bundy, a tart; Kelly Bundy, promiscuous and dim-witted; Bud Bundy, girl crazy and unpopular. As TV families evolved, television began to make room for all types of family dynamics. So yes, it seems that the types of shows that got the most ratings were the ones that sort of reflected what people could relate to the most, right? And that is dysfunctional families in general. So you can see here Al Bundy, a once shining football star but now miserably married shoe salesman, right? This is probably the story of many families in the United States, and hence why it became so popular. The 5-child roles in dysfunctional families. So interestingly enough, in dysfunctional families, there are roles that end up naturally coming out of the sort of situations and the upbringing of these type of families. And so here you can see on the left, upper left, you've got the scapegoat, typically known as the black sheep of the family. You've got the mascot, who's sort of overly compensating, always cheerleading everybody else, but barely, looking after themselves. You've got the chief enabler. Typically, it could be a mother that enables bad behavior, all out of a sort of misguided way of love, or seeing love for their family. Sort of not calling out bad behavior, but enabling it, because it maybe in some way, shape, or form, it may keep them in sort of a position of power within the family. So I can identify all of these type of roles within dysfunctional families. The lost child. So the movie I was talking about, Always Be My Maybe, that lost child archetype right there, or that role, was what was demonstrated, right? So often left on their own, to their own devices, and perhaps deep down seeking more family connection. Then you've got the family hero, right? This is the person in the family who has a savior complex and ends up being responsible or feeling responsible for everybody in the family. Personally, I could probably relate to the family hero as an eldest child, and that was definitely an experience and a journey in being able to realize that you are playing any one of these types of roles. Then you have to find a way to overcome them. How dysfunctionality molds entrepreneurs. So in terms of how this dysfunctionality molds many entrepreneurs, is that on the right you can see there, right? Usually the dysfunctionality causes children, as they grow up, to question rules and traditions, right? Because they might have seen a lot of rules and traditions in the household which just didn't make sense and were kind of forced upon by the authoritarian figures in the family, typically the parents. Two, they defy all odds, through perseverance. So despite what dysfunctionality they may have in the home or within the family, they still overcome it. And now, unfortunately or unfortunately, not everybody is able to actually defy all odds within these dysfunctional settings, but many of the successful entrepreneurs do manage to. And I'll share some examples of those. 3, strong drive to prove others wrong. So typically, as a result of kind of being told, they were nothing, they were dumb, or they, would never amount to anything, many of these same type of individuals end up having a strong drive to prove other people wrong, that they really can do things in life and be someone that they might have always been told they could not be. 4, they typically operate calmly amidst chaos. So, children within these dysfunctional families, because they're just so used to being moved around a lot, things never being stable, they have to find their own stability within. And so they, it doesn't matter how chaotic things are around them, they actually have the ability to stay calm amidst that all. And then 5, you can read any room. So typically these same children are able to read sort of the emotions, so they tend to have high EQs and are able to navigate themselves around it. Whether that's through compassion or sometimes even manipulation. So it's a survival mechanism, and it just comes sort of with the territory. And there's an article linked below in terms of where I've adapted those 5 points from. So feel free to pause this video if you're looking at this outside of the live time, and check that article out as well. So famous people from known dysfunctional upbringings. One of the more famous is probably Oprah. She pretty much rose from poverty. She was able to transcend her impoverished upbringing. She did luckily have a grandmother who took care of her and acted as a solid role model. She was sexually abused by family members. She had a pretty rough upbringing, but in the end she was able to overcome a lot of it. But her desire to sort of make it, came from that setting. And it's typically right from adversity that many entrepreneurs do come out on the other end. And again, just to note that not all entrepreneurs are successful people, and I put that in quotations because we kind of all define success in different ways. But many of them are able to overcome these adversities and then translate that into the business realm, right? So entrepreneurship, because there is often a high failure rate, it doesn't seem to faze many entrepreneurial types because they kind of are already used to that in their upbringing. On the right, you have Tony Robbins, Anthony Robbins, who, if you haven't heard of him before, he's sort of the one of the best known high performance coaches, who's often called in by many celebrities, politicians, leaders, etc. Is very good at being able to motivate people into action in a very healthy and constructive manner. However, if you look into his own past, he's shared his story about how he came from, I think it was a single mother household, but it involved it was very abusive as well. And I'm not too sure if it was from his mother or stepdad's, where he experienced a lot of the physical abuse. And I think there was also some drug substance abuse involved too. But as a result of that, he looked at that and realized that's not what he wanted for himself or for his own mother and family. And so he made it his goal to overcome all of that. Right? He became very determined to turn a new chapter in his life and channel a lot of that sort of anger and pain into something more constructive where he would help other people. So it's interesting, if you look at Tony Robbins' journey too, there was probably a period of having the savior complex. He really did want to help people to save them, right? Because of all the things that he went through. And it's pretty noble, but at the same time, if you look through his journey too, he shares how he had to go through his own healing, but as he was doing that, he was sharing what was working for him with the outside world. And again, none of us are perfect, but it's through these sort of adversities that, we come to realizations about ourselves, and at different stages or chapters that may help people at their particular stages as well. And of course, one of the more famous ones, Michael Jackson, his is a bit of a tragic story, but he's also become a legend for what he was able to put out into the world, from his music to his iconic dances to just many things. He is there's a lot of controversy around him even after death. for his sort of relationships with younger children. There's a lot of misinformation around that as well, which is kind of sad because it puts a dent in his own legacy. But personally, I am a fan of Michael Jackson. I've done a lot of research into a lot of the allegations made against him, and gotta say it was hard to read and hear about some of the things that were said about him in relation to younger kids. But there's also a camp on the other side who have proven that many of those things were false. But either way, if you look into his childhood, he pretty much didn't have one. So he ended up developing Peter Pan syndrome, where he just wanted to stay sort of forever young, and sort of replicate that into his adulthood. And but as a result of sort of all the trauma that he went through when he was younger, he was able to create great music, that a lot of people could resonate with, and he was actually able to make a lot of change in the world during his lifetime. And so with all of these famous people, they, again, are human beings, right? They're not perfect. But when you start to look into their pasts and their childhoods and their family upbringings, you realize that that is what shaped them to be who they are today. And it's important that we sort of take a look at our own upbringings and how that contributes to where we are today. Because you can't look at these stories in isolation. Their success was not overnight. There's a lot of stuff that they would have had to go through in order to get to where they are today. Personal experiences. So this is a bit of an interesting one. So this photo was taken during a time where it was the beginning of my own parents' divorce. And I share this because, well, one, look at me there. There was a time where I thought I was really cool. But there was a lot of alcohol involved, a lot of anger that I think came out. Used the alcohol as a way to sort of drown out a lot of the, I think, feelings and experiences I was going through there. More so probably my own sisters. I cared a lot more about what was happening to them, because when my own parents went through their divorce, it was around 18, 19. So at least during my formative years, my parents were still technically, still together, right? It wasn't a much of a dysfunctional family, but I think by the time I hit that period, I realized actually there was a lot of stuff that was sort of buried during my own upbringing that just wasn't talked about a lot, and I didn't really discover that until around 18, 19. But my own sisters were around 12, 13 at the time. And so during this period where this photo was taken, this is when I started to begin to learn just how much was happening under the surface that maybe we were shielded from. And so a lot of anger came out. There were times where, I would punch holes through walls and whatnot. And it definitely shaped sort of a rethinking of life, right? Of where I saw myself, what I wanted to be doing, and what mattered most. And so I think I definitely saw a lot more dysfunctionality happen within my own family when that all began. And so, I always feel for my sisters, but luckily they've grown up, they've done well for themselves. I'm very proud of them. But there was about a 7-year period where all of us, went through what we felt like was hell. It's a very dark period. But looking back, I can definitely see how that shaped my interest in entrepreneurship. I never even saw entrepreneurship as a pathway, but I think out of necessity and trying to figure out ways to make money on my own terms and to do things on my own terms, this entrepreneurial path, it presented itself to me. And so I ended up using business as a way to channel a lot of sort of my anger and frustrations in a constructive manner. But there was definitely a lot of that there. So why does any of this matter? I believe that at least at this point in time, and I share this for anybody who's watching and is resonating with a lot of the things that are being talked about in this episode. I share this because I think it is important for us to have this discussion around sort of how our upbringing has influenced us today. And if it's uncomfortable, good. If it's uncomfortable, it's good, because it means that there may potentially still be stuff that you haven't spent the time to sit down and look at, right? This is all about sort of confronting your own shadow. I believe in psychology they call it shadow work, right? Where you look at sort of the darker parts of yourself that you might have swept under the rug, while looking out into the future and trying to do all this external stuff. And because at the time of this episode, we're in going through a global pandemic, a lot of people are still working from home. It is a good time to reflect on these things. And so, it's important to understand your childhood influences, because if you aren't aware of how you got to where you are today, you can't sort of navigate and see or ask the right questions. So asking yourself, where do your ambitions truly come from? All right, are they externally validating or internally grounded? So when I say externally validating, are you doing things because you're seeking validation outside of yourself? You're seeking validation from others. You're seeking love from others. You're seeking attention. You're seeking all of these things outside of yourself. There are many entrepreneurs and successful people who actually do become successful because they are seeking, a lot from the outside world to potentially fill a hole or a gap that they might not have been able to get from home. Nothing wrong with that. Many great things have sort of been put out into the world and helped many other people as a result of this. But, what sort of energy do you want to put out to the world? If you are truly thinking long-term and legacy-wise. And internally grounded, So if you are at a point where, you realize that, yes, you're no longer seeking things outside of yourself, is it internally grounded now? Have you done the work on yourself to find a way to ground all of those angers or frustrations or feelings of lack and void? There's a great episode from one of my favorite shows, Avatar: The Last Airbender, where one of the antagonists of the show, his name is Zuko, he ends up going from somebody who was filled with sort of vengeance and wanting to prove something to his father by going after another character, the Avatar, and capturing him. And a lot of his firebending skills was all based on his anger and rage, right? So that's where he got his power from. But there was a point where he realized that, he was doing a lot of this just to prove himself to his father, and yet the father kind of really didn't care. And when I think he realized that, he lost his ability to firebend, but then had to rediscover himself and rediscover the true source of his firebending, which can be from a place of love and groundedness, right? So that the fire that he was putting out to the world was not always about destruction and tearing other people down, right? Always being in sort of like a fighting or combative state, that he could actually firebend in a way that would warm and light up others around him, right? And that firebending and fire in general actually had so many other colors than the one that just came out of anger or rage-infused firebending. So this was a very, at the time when I watched that episode, I might send everybody a link in the description box, but when I saw that episode, it was I could resonate with that a lot, because I was at a time where I too was also going through this period of, sort of being filled with anger and rage, and realizing that there's a better way, that you can get the same sort of power, if not even stronger, by transforming that anger and rage into something more constructive, where you are coming from a grounded place, and that you could use your fire to actually help heal and light up the world in a warmer and more compassionate manner. Because just because you have a lot of power doesn't mean you need to exercise it all the time too. I think one of the most one of the biggest lessons I learned was, just because you can't doesn't mean you should. A lot of time people think that when it comes to power and might, that you should exercise that all the time in order to sort of prove yourself to other people that you are strong. Probably the strongest characters I've known in my life, the strongest people, are those who are actually quite powerful, but they don't need to use that power to exert control over others. They have an assertive strength about them that's calm and grounded, So it's like they could mess people up, but they don't, because they've got self-discipline. And I think that's a lot stronger than those who go around, just trying to show that they are strong to the world without having any self-discipline whatsoever. And so, finally, are you projecting any securities out to the world or coming from a place of peace? And I think this goes back to the example that I just shared. Change the narrative. So, having said all this, I think it's important for us to change the narrative. So many of us might be used to watching a lot of movies or TV series that sort of perpetuate the dysfunctional family, all right? And because it's about views, it makes sense, and they're mirroring the real world, so it's not really their fault. They are just also taking their own personal examples and putting it out to the world. And probably why a lot of people watch it is because they can resonate or relate. But I think it's important that we start to recognize that these are mirrors of stuff that we have experienced, but we need to start changing the narratives and stories to what we ideally would like more of, And to be fair, sometimes that might not be as entertaining to watch, right? But I think it's important for us to be able to know the difference, distinguish between what is just there for entertainment versus what is true or what we would like to see more of in the world, right? So here are some sort of suggestions, right? If you are looking to change the narrative around dysfunctionality within families and your own upbringing, whether it be within your own family or within your own business, right? Because there's a lot of correlations between families and business, if you care to look into it as such. So 1, find a healthy support network. 2, speak up about your past if it needs healing. And I use this word healing in a non-professional sense, because I'm not going to sit here and say that I have any professional qualifications to identify what constitutes healing or not, but I'm using this in just more general, broader term about what, things that you could do for yourself. 3, find healthy role models. So, a lot of entrepreneurs, if you are looking up to someone, look into their own past and history, right? From what base are they coming from? Are they projecting a sort of a view of, success is all about money, cars, and all of that sort of stuff that's very material? Or are they projecting insecurities out into the world? Because there are many people who have a lot of money, but might not necessarily be very happy. They might be perpetuating broken homes and broken families as well. So try to find maybe some of the more unspoken of entrepreneurs, right? I found a fair few that I keep in my own sort of personal journal that I look up to, that isn't necessarily they're not necessarily celebrities, that you hear about. But when I looked into their own stories and past histories, I resonated with that as sort of what I wanted to emulate versus just what's popular. Develop healthy habits, right? If you have habits that aren't really helping you out and not really contributing, then change them or seek to change them. 5, work on your relationship skills. I think there's many cases of entrepreneurs who think that they need to hustle 24/7 at the expense of their relationships. That is a personal choice, because if you look hard enough, you can find examples of entrepreneurs who've been able to balance, a successful career and life for themselves while also maintaining a healthy family. And if that is important to you, then you make time for the things that are worth making time for. And I had to go through this myself, because there was a period where I was also just working all the time and not making any time for relationships, and I'm also working to change that. Overcome victimhood. If you find yourself, blaming the world, if you find yourself sort of finding reasons to bring others down when you don't know them personally or don't know their stories, that is a form of victimhood. If you find yourself you may be getting triggered by what others do or say, it means that you may have some healing to do for yourself, and so be aware of that so that you're not projecting out those insecurities to the wider community. And then 8, don't be afraid. 7, transcend media narrative. So we were talking about this, whereby just be aware of what you watch, right? That it isn't necessarily a reflection of reality. It is a reflection of people's own stories and what it does exist, and you can do things to change that narrative as well, right? A lot of the stuff that we go through are all stories in our head. And then 8, don't be afraid to seek professional help. So I put this here, and this is definitely something that I've learned to appreciate from my own partner. She's very much an advocate for mental health. And to be honest, before meeting her, I didn't think too much about it, because even as a guy, and especially one that has gone through like all this, I guess, adversity through my own families and stuff, just get on with it, right? And but yeah, of course, there are going to be some things that you may have that are much more deep rooted, and that there's only so much you can do on your own. So just don't be afraid to seek professional help. That's something I'm working on myself as well, at least opening up to the idea. And change. Okay, so this book, I'm sharing this because this is actually a book I read a good couple years ago, and it was quite interesting because there's a lot of correlations between it and dysfunctional families in general. So this is about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. So like dysfunctional families, you may see similar traits play out within your own business and your own teams. And if you have a read of this book, I'm sure you can get an audiobook version as well. You will find ways to sort of combat those dysfunctions, right? Because from communications, a lot of people bring their personal stuff into the work environment without even realizing it. And so if you can identify what those dysfunctions are, you can address them, right? And you can also increase the desire of your team to be able to address them, because then it makes things less personal, right? When you start to realize that the way that people act out is often from past influences, and unless they are made aware of where that comes from, it makes it very difficult to just be truly objective. A lot of times we look at things and performance within a team based on results, and I think if we look at businesses and teams as a way of healing one another, and again, I use that word lightly, it's more about improving each other. It's probably a better word. Then your business life becomes an opportunity to be more than just about making money, right? That you can take perhaps some of the lessons you learn within business back to your own family home, if your family home has been dysfunctional as well. So I think that's probably what the biggest opportunity there is for businesses, because we spend so much time at work, and I think if people could become a lot more cognizant of these things in the workplace, I think we could help solve a lot of these sort of upbringing issues or family issues, right? Because at the end of the day, I see sort of businesses and communities as just reflections of what we've experienced at home, right? And then finally, in the next episode, I'm actually going to be talking about sort of the myth of the lone wolf. And so I've just put this here to share with you all how this relates, because there's also in the world, when the sort of hierarchical model of like alpha, beta, omega for wolf packs was sort of shared on human beings, right? What most people don't realize is that model of the alpha, beta, omega actually came from a study that was based on wolves in captivity. And because it's called the It Will Come Show, and if you notice the logo is a lone wolf there, it perpetuated the myth that the hierarchical structure is something that we should emulate, right? If we want it to be more functional. But as further research came from that same researcher, he realized that model was flawed because it was looking at wolves in captivity. So in a way, if you look at a lot of the structures that we've kind of put in place, and if we've glorified this same sort of model of the alpha, beta, omega hierarchical structure, it was emulated from wolves in captivity. So they were dysfunctional, right? They weren't in a healthy environment. And so there is actually later research and studies done about wolves that are out in more natural environments, ecosystems where things are a lot healthier. And so I'm going to share a little bit more about that in the next episode, so you understand how we can also shift the narrative for ourselves. But we cannot do that unless we are aware of the narrative that we tell ourselves today. And so with that, I'll leave you with this final quote. You are responsible for your life. You can't keep blaming others for your dysfunction. Life is really about moving on. And this is from Oprah Winfrey. So essentially, if you look into Oprah's story, you will see that she had a lot of adversity that she had to overcome. And if she can do it, you can do it as well. And with that, question for you, right? How has your family shaped your journey? We'd love to hear if you are brave enough and confident enough to share sort of your response to this question. Put it in the comments below, wherever you're watching this from, whether it be Twitch, YouTube, Periscope, or even Facebook. And remember to like and subscribe. And as always, remember, through patience and persistence,